It's great to be here with everyone, and thanks to Rabbi Dr. Farivar and my sister, Rebbetzin Farivar, for opening their beautiful home to Shiur Torah. Should be Bezrat Hashem for Ilui Neshama of Rachel Yafa Bat Victoria, and the refuah of all Cholei Yisrael that have been in a difficult situation due to the matzav in Eretz Yisrael and here in the United States, Bezrat Hashem. Now, Tefila is one of the most important things to speak about, and also is one of the most difficult things to speak about because, let's be honest, it's difficult to stand in front of a wall and try to think that you're in front of Hashem, something that's not tangible, and it's difficult. The Yerushalmi already writes in the beginning of the fourth parak in Masechet Brachot, the honesty of the Amoraim, speaking about their difficulties in davening b'kavanah. It's not simple. To the point that Shmuel there says, thanks for my reflex that my shidra, my spine bows automatically when it gets to modim. Now, this Gemara could be very much misused, but it's the honesty, in the intellectual honesty of the Amoraim, saying this is a challenge, it's difficult. It's not only in 2021, nowadays it's much more difficult, probably. I think as of 2 years ago, the attention span of a regular average American citizen was 8 seconds. The goldfish, I think, is 9 seconds. So that's where we're holding, But it's, at the same time, very important. The Gemara says in Masechet Brachot, Daf Vav Amud Bet, that Tefila, the Gemara brings a pasuk, Kerum Zulut Livnei Adam. Rum means in the height of high. It's the highest thing that exists in the world. Dvarim ha'omdim berumo shel olam, u'bnei Adam mezalzelim bahem. And people disgrace it. People don't take proper advantage of Tefillah, such a great and powerful tool that we have, and yet it's kind of like something we do. It becomes a routine thing that we're used to doing, and so on. Speaking about the routine, one of the most difficult things that have been mentioned in the entire Tanakh is about doing things out of rote in a mechanical way. The pasuk Navi Yeshaya says perhaps the most difficult language that you could find in anywhere in Tanakh. We have the language very similar in the parasha of Klalot, in the parasha of the curses in the Torah, that says, I will give you an unbelievable level of difficulties. Pele. In Navi Yeshaya doubles the language. It says, "Vehirbeti et makot ha'am hazeh hafle vafele." I will make it in an super unbelievable way. 2 peles. And why is that? You think to yourself, what did they do that they deserve such a language? And the pasuk says, Ya'an, because Nigash ha'am hazeh elai bepiv, this nation has come close to me with their mouth. Ubisfatav kibeduni, with their literally lip service, they respect me. Velibo rachak mimeni, but their heart is far from me. That means you're doing the tefillah, you're doing the mitzvot, but it's like the pasuk explains going on. V'haya yiratam oti mitzvat anashim melumada. Their fear of me is out of rote. Mitzvat anashim melumada. I think they have in New York, Baruch Hashem, it hasn't gotten here yet, they have a terminology for it, orthoprox. They practice orthodoxy, but they don't really believe in it, they don't really feel it. We practice lots of orthodoxy, but how much of the heart we put into it, that really is Rahmana Liba by Hashem wants the hearts, and that's something important. We know the power of Tefillah, perhaps to me, stands out in a story in Tanakh with Chizkiyahu HaMelech. After David HaMelech, perhaps the most righteous and famous for being righteous king of Yehuda was Chizkiyahu HaMelech. He took a nation of Ovdei Avodah Zarah, of all idol worshippers, and he made it in such way that the Gemara says, Batku Medan Bat Beersheva, they checked from one end of Eretz Yisrael to the other end of Eretz Yisrael. Velo matzu ish ve'isha tinok v'tinoket. They didn't find a man or woman, a kid, little kids even, that they were not proficient in the most difficult areas of the Torah. This is what he did. He turned around the entire generation. And he did something that Hashem was not happy with. Now, whether it is based on the Midrash, the way he spoke to Hashem when Sancheriv laid siege on the city, or whether be it because he did not get married, the simple understanding is because he didn't get married. And Navi Yeshaya comes to him, he says, Chizkiyahu, sav lebetecha, write your will. Ki met ata velo tichye, because you're going to die from this sickness. He was very ill. And you don't even have chelek lo'olam haba, says the Mefarshim. So why is that? Because Hashem has already made the gezerah on you, and it's finished. You may as well just write your will, and done. What does he tell him? He says to him, Ben Amos, Yeshaya was the son of Amos. He doesn't even call him with his name. He says, Ben Amos, kaleh nevuatcha v'tzeh. Finish up your nevuah and get out of my palace. Mekubalani mibe avi abba. I have a tradition from my great-grandfather's house, David HaMelech. Afilu cherev chada munachat al tzavaro shel adam. Even if you have a sharp sword laid on your neck, al yimna atzmo min harachamim. Never give up from tefillah. So he says he sent him off. And the pasuk continues, Vayasev Chizkiyahu et panav el hakir. He turned to the wall and he started an intensified tefillah. He davened until Hashem gave him 15 years of extra life. He got married, he had children, he led the nation. And that's a powerful story. And this he learned perhaps from David HaMelech. I always wondered, where did he learn this from? And perhaps we could connect this with the story of David HaMelech himself. When Natan HaNavi comes to David in Shmuel Bet, Perek Yud Aleph Yud Bet, it's the story of Bathsheba and the punishment of David HaMelech. And there it says that the first child that Bathsheba gave birth to was ill. And this is the Nevuah of Natan HaNavi. Natan comes to him, he says, Hashem is upset with you. This kid is going to die. Okay, so the kid gets sick. And what does David HaMelech do? What would a normal person do? Okay, Navi said, no, it's difficult, but it's going to happen. Nope. David HaMelech fasted. He sat on the floor. He put sack on. He cried and he davened and he cried and he davened. And he says, he explained afterwards, he said, I said to myself, maybe Hashem is going to change his mind. But you have to understand, how does that exactly happen with tefillah, right? After all, when Hashem made a decision, if you daven, how is that going to change anything, right? How is that going to change anything? And the Rashba writes this actually. The Rashba, one of the greatest of the Rishonim, the medieval authorities of Halakha and Torah, he writes in his Tshuvot, in his response, in Cheleg Hey, in the 5th volume, Siman Nun, I believe it is, he writes that the tefillah could change even the fate of a person despite what has been decreed upon him. He said, because you become a new person, and Hashem has rachamim on someone that begs in front of him. And then he writes, he says, he was a student of the Ramban, the Nachmanides Ramban, like the Marchu writes, the great Kabbalist, Reb Chaim Vital, the legendary student of Ariya Kadosh. He writes that Ramban was the last of the Mekubalei HaEmet, and this was his Talmid. So he writes a lot of Kabbalah, but he does not say it actually. He just says, you should know, there are secret things over here as well. And he ends off there. He says, yes, there are a lot of things that are mystical, and for those who understand, you understand even the mechanism better, which, again, it's beyond the scope of this talk. But that is how it works. The Maharal goes as far as saying that even if Hashem has made a decree that you are going to get something, you really want this, and Hashem has actually written it for you that you're going to get this. Says the Maharal, you may not end up getting it if you don't daven for it. And he says, I'll show it to you from the Pasuk itself. The Torah says, when Hashem created the world, there were no atzavim, there were no grass and vegetables. Nothing was growing out of the ground. The Midrash says they were waiting by the level of where the dirt, the earth meets the air outside, and they were not coming out. Why? The Pasuk says, Ki Adam ayin la'avod et, because there was no person to daven for them. Rain would not come because Adam HaRishon was not there yet, was not born yet, was not created yet, to realize the tzorech of tefillah and to daven. And Rashi brings this as well. So Maharal says, from here you see, something is supposed to happen. There's supposed to be vegetables and grass and all those things on earth. But it's not going to happen if you don't daven for it. It's powerful. The Midrash says in Tanchuma, in Parashat Vayera, that if Hashem is speaking, says even if a person doesn't deserve something, he's not deserving, not coming to him. You run it through the machine, it comes a big red X. No. Says, if he is marbeh b'tfilah and b'tachanunim, he asks Hashem, Hashem says, I will still give it to him b'chesed, undeserving, for free. You all like free stuff, right? You daven, you get it for free, even if you don't deserve it. So that's the power of 12. You could speak for hours on end. This really should be a series, not just one class, because again, this is what we have. Hakol Kol Yaakov. Our power is not in our politics and in our technology and in our wealth, and our power is Tolat Yaakov, like a worm that is vulnerable. And Chazal said the only thing that the worm has is the mouth. Like that's how it lives. The only thing we've got is our koach tefillah and koach Torah, using our mouth for avodat Hashem. So that Be'ezrat Hashem should be an initiation. At some point we should have, I guess, a series for Inyanei Tefillah. But I was handed a number of questions, which I'm going to try to review. I have them here in front of me, and we'll try to answer them. And if there are any questions, me talking, you could interrupt and ask, or you could keep it for the end and ask. Be'ezrat Hashem. So what's a girl or woman obligated to daven every day as bare minimum? What's the bare minimum of a davening obligation for a woman? So I'm very afraid to answer this because I haven't checked with our bursting to see if I don't want to ruin anything. But so we'll it's like this. The tefillah, the concept of tefillah, I'll say a long answer, but this will answer a lot of other questions. Bear with me, it's an important background information. There is a great machloket rishonim, a debate within the medieval authorities, whether or not the core concept of tefillah, man, woman, doesn't make a difference, is a biblical concept, or is it maybe minat Torah, you don't have to daven at all. The whole thing is rabbinic enactment, a rabbinic institution. Rambam, among many others, writes that the concept of tefillah is an obligation, a daily obligation from the Torah itself. Ulovdo b'chol levavchem, like the Gemara says, ezehui avodah shebalev, zuhi tefillah. When the pasuk says, I want you to serve Hashem with all of your heart, the Gemara asks, what is the avodah that's in your heart? How do you serve on the Mizbeach in the Bet HaMikdash? That's a physical avodah, we understand. But it says, b'chol levavchem. What is an avodah that's in your heart? Is tefillah. By the way, in parentheses, you see that the core of tefillah is in your heart. The mouth is just verbalizing, you have to do that. But a tefillah without kavanah, like Chazal says, keguf v'lo neshama, it's like a dead body. So that's the shita of Rambam. On the other hand, the Ramban, in his arguments with Rambam and Sefer HaMitzvot, he disagrees. He says, no, tefillah is not a biblical concept in a regular setting. And by the way, the Tosafot say the same thing. This is also a school. Each one of them is a school of Rishonim. Tosafot in Brachot Daf Chaf, that only be'et sarah, the tefillah is a biblical concept. In other words, you're in you find yourself in a difficulty, something is bothering you, or communally we are facing difficulty and terror and whatever else, and then you daven to Hashem, that is a biblical mitzvah. To turn to Hashem in be'et tzara, in the time of difficulty, that is a mitzvah d'oraita. But regular days when everything is great is not a biblical mitzvah. Rather, it is a rabbinic institution. That's the machloket rishonim. Now, how does this potentially change anything in the chiyuv of nashim? Is as follows. If the concept of tefillah is only one time a day biblical, is that considered a mitzvah that's time-bound or not? It's not, because you could daven any time that you want. It could be morning, it could be afternoon, it could be evening time. Doesn't make a difference when you do it. Once a day you do it. So it's not time-bound. And therefore, we can't use the concept of the leniency for women of kol mitzvot shazman grama nashim pturot, that a positive mitzvah that is time-bound, the ladies would be absolved from it, patur from it. So according to Rambam, you can't have that because it doesn't have a specific time. You could do it at any time. So according to him, biblically speaking, on a deoraita level, women have to daven once a day. According to Ramban, that the whole thing is rabbinic, and now they have time. Like Shacharit, you could daven only until, the fourth hour, Chatzot, B'diavad, and Mincha has its time, Arvit has its time. Then it turns into a mitzvah that says Rabbanan Shazman Grama, which we pass, even the Rabbanan is the same thing as the Oraita, and therefore, it's not within the same category as that. But the Gemara says, Tefila rachameninhu. Tefillah, the concept of tefillah is asking for rachamim from Hashem, and therefore the Gemara says, "Anashim bai rachami v'nashi no bai rachami." Or only men need the compassion of Hashem, women don't need the compassion of Hashem. So therefore, whatever is the chiyuv of men rabbinically would be the same chiyuv for women rabbinically. So according to Ramban, comes out that you should daven twice a day. Now, why not 3 times? Because Arvit, for men even, was not really an obligation. It just happens to be, the Gemara says, Arvit is Reshut. It's an option. If you can daven, beautiful. If you can't, also nice. But in the course of Jewish history, we accepted it, us men accepted it on ourselves as an obligation. So for us, we can't say, I'm not feeling it, it's not going to happen. For us right now, it's chiyuv. Women never accepted it on themselves as a chiyuv. So therefore, they stick to twice, according to the Shita of Ramban and Tosafot. So, again, according to Rambam, and Shulchan Aruch follows that, there will be 1 tefillah. According to Ramban and Tosafot, there will be 2 tefillah. That's how Rambam classically is understood by the Magen Avraham, many others, and including in them is Chacham Obadia in many, many places in his Tshuvot. Now, I want to put in parentheses, and I'm careful not to confuse people, so I'm putting this in parentheses just out there. This is not the understanding of Rambam according to everyone. For instance, and I just say it matter-of-factly, as Machloket Haravadia and Chacham ben Zion Abba Shaul. Fair enough? Let's keep it simple. Rabbi ben Zion Abba Shaul says, absolutely not. Rambam also holds you have to daven twice. Right? And he says Rambam's language indicates that Nashim are chayav to tefillah, and he does not say that they are chayav to tefillah any different than men. Right? This is in Perek Aleph of Hilchot Tefillah, Halakha Aleph, the very beginning of Hilchot Tefillah of Rambam. Rambam just says, women are obligated to daven like men. That's all he says. And Shulchan Aruch says pretty much the same thing. In Siman Kufav, he says, women are chayav to daven. So says Rabbi Zion Abba Shaul, it's not only 1 tefillah. Even though that biblically speaking, it would be a mitzvah once a day, but the rabbinic institution of what we said, according to the Nachmanides Ramban, Rachameininhu, that is asking for Hashem's compassion, everyone needs that, that's not deleted. That you have according to Rambam too. So therefore, they stick with this that is twice. Now, the minhag of Ashkenazim is to daven twice, shacharit and mincha. For the Sfaradim, meikar adin, it would be one. But if someone could do it, then it's beautiful to daven more because, first of all, you cover your bases according to everyone. It's no longer just Haravadia versus this. It's machloket what the Sfaradi poskim hold, right? Meikar adin, the bare bone halacha, once a day is enough and better to do shacharit because it's a more complete tefillah with everything that comes with it. But if you could do more, a person should do more. Especially for people who don't yet have 20 children climbing up the walls and everything, and you have the ability of doing it. So that's beautiful. If you can't do it, then a person could do the bare minimum of davening once. The Gemara says, "Halvai," in Brachot Chaf Aleph, "Halvai sheitpalel adam kol hayom." Halvai, a person should daven the whole day, which this actually is going to answer one of the other questions that I cite here. Can a woman daven arvit? Or maybe only men could daven arvit. The answer is, women could daven arvit too if they want to daven 3 times a day. Kol hakavod, the more the merrier. And it's not, for reasons beyond the scope of this talk, it's not a problem of bracha she'ena sricha, unneeded, unnecessary bracha. Because again, this is rachamim, this is asking for Hashem's compassion in the context of Chazal have instituted. So that is, now when it comes to Musaf, that's a whole different story. Right? Until now, are things clear? Yes?
I have a question. So if she were to say Arvit, would she say Shem Malchut for the 2 brachot before Shema?
So we're going to get to that. Good. Just finishing up the little basic things about the Shemona Esrei. When we say Tefila, by the way, we're speaking about Shemona Esrei. It's a Mishnah in Masechet Brachot Per Gimel, says Nashim Pturot mi Kriyat Shema v'chayavot b'Tefila. What does Tefila means? We generally speaking say Tefila, we mean the whole Shacharit, right? The 350 pages, right? But Tefila in the language of Chazal means Shemona Esrei. So ladies are patur from Kriyat Shema and they're chayav with Tefila. So we're now speaking about just Shemona Esrei. Now Musaf is a whole different story, right? So listen in. The concept that we mentioned, the reason women do daven is because it's compassion of Hashem. Tefillah rachameninhu. Musaf is not asking for compassion. Musaf is just a replacement of the korbanot that was brought in that specific time. Musaf of Rosh Chodesh is keneged, is according to what they used to bring as a korban musaf on Rosh Chodesh in Beit HaMikdash. Same for Rosh Hashanah, same for all the other Yamim Tovim. So therefore, musaf is not, we can't borrow that concept and say, well, they're asking for Hashem's mercy, so the more the merrier. And therefore, there are many who say musaf that has a timeline. It's mitzvat aseh d'Rabbanan she'azman grama, better for women not to daven even, right? Why? Because you're patur from it, and it's not rachame. So better would be that when you do daven it, you get into a question of Sfardim versus Ashkenazim. I'm going to try to explain this clearly and in a short way. There is a general machloket, huge machloket, generally speaking within Ashkenazim and Sfaradim, but many communities of Sfaradim, their minhag is like the Ashkenazim. Whether or not women say brachot on the positive mitzvot that are time-bound. Do you say a bracha on Sukkah? Do you say a bracha on Lulav? Right? And so on and so forth. Do women say bracha on that? Now, Maran paskins like Rambam, that the mitzvot aseh shazman graman nashim are patur, and therefore it's bracha she'ena sricha. It's an unneeded bracha. And Rambam holds that if you say an unneeded bracha, you're in transgression of the third of the Aseret HaDivrot Lo Tisa Et Shem Hashem Elokecha Lashav. He equates an unnecessary bracha with bracha lebatala. So therefore, better to stay away than do it. Why you have to get yourself into trouble? You're not obligated to do it, right? Now, many of the Ashkenazim, they paskin like Tosafot and Rosh, that no, women are not chayav, but they could make themselves chayav. They could bring it upon themselves. So if they want to say bracha, kol hakavod, say it. So generally speaking, Ashkenazim do say bracha. The old minhag of Sfaradim has been not to. Now, many communities of the Sfaradim have adopted the minhag of the Ashkenazim, and it's complicated because Haravadia would tell you this is a mistake, and they have to change it. Others would say, what do you mean this mistake is for hundreds of years? And this is a fight, an ongoing fight between the two schools of thought in the Sephardi communities. And here is the halacha down to the halacha lemaaseh. So listen well. If you have a clear minhag in your community, and I don't know who I'm speaking with the backgrounds and so on, if there's a clear minhag in the community to say it, then you could continue that minhag. It's not, there isn't enough there's enough, I should say the other way, there's enough background to say that this is not a mistake in minhag, right? But if you don't know what your minhag has been, it's not a clear minhag, it's better to be safe than sorry. Do the mitzvah, don't say the bracha, right? You do the mitzvah without bracha, you're yotze. You say bracha, then you're already, according to Rambam, maybe doing averah. So why would you want to do that, right? So Musaf gets into that category, and therefore certainly if someone comes late to shul and they've davened shacharit and now they're doing Musaf, instead of doing Musaf with them, you could do shacharit and save yourself from that machaloket. But Musaf of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, those ones, many say that you're chayav to do, so therefore that's totally, and Ne'ilah also. Those are rachami. Those are, even though that they are not part of the institution of the first two tefillot, well, the two tefillot of Shacharit and Mincha during the day, but they are considered rachami, and therefore a person should daven the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Tefillat Ne'ilah. Okay, so that's a long answer to the first question. Now the rest of them are just going to be one-liner, basically, because this is the background that's needed for most of the differences. Now, the second one is, when should the person stand, sit during Shacharit, and because Shachar, Baruch Shamar, Az Yashir, Ishtabach, Alon Shir Shayom. So, now, here is the basic obligation of Tefillah. Actually, I said the background, I didn't answer the actual question, the first question. The basic, the minimum obligation is, you get up, you say your Birkot HaShachar, right? That we say. Aside from Sha'asani Kirsono, that we say without bracha, without Shemu Malchut, right? The rest of them you say, including Birkat Torah, which is a whole question by itself. Women, the Gemara in Sotah Chaf Aleph seems to say they're not obligated to daven, to learn rather the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, but the halacha maintains that there are two elements of Talmud Torah. The things that you have to do, you have to learn about them. All of the mitzvot that women are obligated to do, they have to also learn the halachot. How are you going to do? And like the Mishnah says in second parak of Avot, En bur yerechet velo am haaretz chasid. Am haaretz, you don't know the halachot. You could be, focusing on saying Tehillim and all of that, but then every Shabbat you're doing borer. Borer is one of the easiest things to transgress, even on a biblical level, if you don't know the details of halachot borer. So, and same is with all the other mitzvot that they are obligated. So therefore, Birkat Torah they do say. Now there are several other reasons for it also. So we'll mention two other reasons why women should say Birkat Torah. One is because Birkat Torah is an element of Birkat Shevach. It's not necessarily only Birkat Mitzvah, that you say, oh, women are patur from the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. But Shevach of Hashem is praising Hashem that has given our nation the Torah. And also, the Ramah says, the women say the korbanot in the morning. Now, not everyone says the korbanot, it's not obligatory, but at the same time, those who say the korbanot, so this is, therefore, they should say Birkat Torah. So you say Birkat Torah, you say the parasha of Birkat Kohanim, which is printed in the Siddur right after Birkat Torah, that you say also that will be considered a learning for you right after, because Birkat Torah is an element of Birkat Mitzvah, so you say it right afterwards. And then you say the first pasuk of Shema, only first pasuk, to accept all Malchut Shamayim. Then you jump to Shemona Esrei, and from there you could go to your daily activities. Alun Shabeach would be beautiful to say, right? It's a beautiful tefillah, but that is the bare minimum. Pretty short, pretty simple. I hope I don't get into trouble for this, right? Now, speak up, please.
When we would say Shem's name and bracha, like for the Kotel, we do say Shem's name, and after that we don't?
Before?
After the Kotel, we don't say Shem's name when we in the
No, we do. In the Shemona Esrei, you say all the Shemona Esrei. Now, so we're going to get to that right now, right? And it is because of this, because you're not obligated to say anything else, right? Only the Tefillah itself, which is Rachami, as we said. So the Birkot Kriyat Shema, so Kriyat Shema, like we said, the Mishnah in third parak of Brachot says, Nashim Pturot mikriyat Shema v'chayavot b'tefillah, right? So Pturot mikriyat Shema, they don't have to say. It's a nice thing to do because it's accepting Hashem's yoke of His kingdom, but you're patur from saying it. You're not obligated. So if you're not obligated, it's going to be what? A mitzvat aseh shazman gramash. Kriyat Shema shel Shacharit has a time. Kriyat Shema shel Arvit has its own time. It's a positive mitzvah that is time bound. Each one has a specific time, and therefore woman would be patur. Go back to what we said about the machloket Sfaradim and Ashkenazim. Rambam's shita would be if it's a positive mitzvah with a time frame, you're patur, and that means you should not say the bracha. So therefore, the Birkat Kriyat Shema, according to Chacham Obadia, would be said without Shem U'Malchut. Even if you decide so to say it, you would skip the, Baruch Atah Hashem, the Atah Hashem, you would skip, right? You would just say Baruch Yotzer Or, right? So the same would be now. I should say this carefully because this is a little complicated, but according to Chacham Obadia, the same is for Baruch Shamar and Nishtabach, which is the way that Tefillah is set up is first Psukei de Zimra, right, which is a lot of Mizmorim, and then there is the process of the actual Tefillah, which is Kriyat Shema and Tefillah, and Shemona Esrei, and what comes after. Now, Psukei de Zimra is preparation, and it has a bracha in the beginning of it and a bracha at the end of it. Baruch Shamar has the bracha in the beginning, and Nishtabach has the bracha at the end. So, but Baruch Shamar and Nishtabach are the brachot of Shevach. They're praising Hashem. It's not the bracha of mitzvot. Birkot Kriyat Shema, the brachot before and after Kriyat Shema, are Birkot Kriyat Shema. It's the bracha on the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema, and therefore it's Birkat HaMitzvah. It's a bracha on a mitzvah. So if you're not mitzuvah, if you're not obligated, what's your business saying the bracha? So that is very easily understandable. Is that clear? No? Any questions? If you lose me, or I lose you, ask a question.
Why don't we say that the brachot for Baruch Shema and Shabbat?
I'm getting there. I'm just clarifying the difference, right? So the Birkot Kriyat Shema we understand because it's a bracha on a mitzvah, and I am not, as a woman, obligated to do the mitzvah, right? But there would be room to say, well, Shevach, when I'm praising Hashem, I could say any bracha I want. And there are many who say you could do that, right? Birkat HaShevach, you could say. Or Lesion, again, this is one of those who holds, as Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli, of the opinion that you could do it. Harabadia says, and he brings lots of rayas. Actually, he had a back and forth with his beloved friend Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was considered the greatest of the Rashi Yeshivot in the Ashkenazi world and one of the greatest of the poskim. They were beloved friends. They actually learned in the same kollel by Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank. He was 10 years older than Chacham Obadia, but he was in love with Chacham Obadia. He really liked him. When someone came to borrow once a sefer from Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he said, you could borrow any sefer in my house, but you can't borrow the Abiyah Omer. That one I'm not going to lend out. Yeah. So when Yevya Omer Chelek Gimel came out, this is in year Tafshin Chaf, that's 61 years ago. So he speaks there in Orach Chaim, Siman Vav. He speaks about the obligation of women and the brachot, and he says all these things at length, much more than what we discussed. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach wrote him a he'ara, wrote him not an objection, but something that he felt he would differ. And it was exactly this. He says, well, even according to Rambam, that says women should not say the bracha on the mitzvot that are positive and time-bound, but that's only for mitzvot. But Birkat HaShevach, if you are praising Hashem, what's wrong with that? That you should be able to say. And Aravadia answers him in that same year. He writes to him, it was printed much later, in a different time, but he writes to him a very long and complicated piece to show that no, it doesn't make a difference really. According to most poskim, even Birkat HaShevach would be the same. So let's review together if I confused anyone, okay? According to Chacham Obadia, Baruch Shamar, you say without, even if you don't have to say it even, right? According to Rambam's first halakha that we learned, you say Birkat HaShachar, Birkat HaTorah, some psukim after that, you say the first pasuk of Kriyat Shema, which even that you don't have to say. You say Shemona Esrei and you're good to go, right? Obviously, it's beautiful to daven a proper tefillah, and there's so much, according to Zohar HaKadosh, and according to Kabbalah, in the order of tefillah, how it's like a ladder, you go step by step, up, and it's a journey through 4 different olamot, and then you come back after Shemona Esrei is the pinnacle height of this whole thing. It's what we call Olam HaAtzilut, and in Kabbalah, and then we come down step by step into Olam HaAsiyah, back down here in our world. So that's beautiful. And again, the Kaf HaChaim and those poskim who follow the Kabbalistic writings, they write that a person should not skip anything because it's like Mekatzes B'Netiyah. You're skipping steps of ladder, you're going to mess up the whole order, and it's not good. But that's not what we're here tonight for. We want to know what's the bare minimum. The bare minimum is what we said, right? And going... now going to the brachot, if someone decides so to say them, according to Chacham Obadia, I would say all of them without Shem Malchut. Baruch Shamar, Yishtabach, all the Birkot Kriyat Shema, before Shema and after Shema. So that is as far as that is concerned. Now, when should you stand, sit during Shacharit? Depends. If you're not davening anything extra, then the brachot, Birkat HaShachar, Birkat HaTorah, you could say sitting. All of that, you could say sitting. The Shema, you could say sitting. The only part that you say standing is Lachash itself, the Tefillah of Shemona Esrei, right? And Al Neshabech, if you say Al Neshabech, then you stand. Now, if you say more, then you follow the same thing as men. Shall we go through it quickly? Right? So Baruch Shamar, if you go through the pages,
Yeah.
Okay, so Baruch Shamar, which is the beginning of Psukei de Zimra, you say it standing until the end of the bracha. Afterwards, one would sit. Now, according to Ben Ish Chai, according to Kabbalah, already for Mizmor LeTodah that comes after Baruch Shamar, you should be sitting, Kabbalistically speaking. The minhag in Iran and some other places was that they sat only when they said Ashrei Yoshvei Betecha. Until Ashrei Yoshvei Betecha, they would stand. In other words, they would stand for Baruch Shamar, they would stand for Mizmor, and they would stand for Yehi Chavod, the first 3 parts of Psukei de Zimra. And then they would sit when they say Ashrei Yoshvei Betecha, then they would sit down. Okay. Ishtabach, many of the Ashkenazim, based on Mishnah Berurah and others, they stand. But again, according to Ben Ish Chai, according to Kabbalah, Ishtabach should be said sitting as well. And again, according to, these are all mostly Kabbalistic. The Vayvarach David, we say it's standing, and if you take a look at your Sidurim, it's the first number of Psukim that are, if I could borrow this from you, the first few psukim are said standing, and it says it in the guidelines of the Siddur up here in most of the Siddurim. And when you sit in, when you get to here, Atahu Hashem Elokim, Asher Bacharta Ba'Avram, until Atahu Hashem Elokim, you stand, and then it says in this Siddur also, Adkan Me'umad, until here, standing, and then you sit. So, again, these are more Kabbalistic items, and Yishtabach, according to Ben Ish Chai, he also would say sitting, right? Unlike what you would see sometimes in the Ashkenazi communities. After Shemona Esrei, if a person is saying vidui again you say standing. Nefilat apayim you say sitting. Ashkenazim they have the falling on the face, which again this was part of the institution of tefillah. Chazal say tefillah is sitting, standing, and falling. Right? All three stages are necessary, and the Shemona Esrei is the standing part. The many parts of the tefillah before and after are sitting, and nefilat apayim is supposed to be falling on your face, which we don't do for, again, reasons beyond the scope of this talk. Ashkenazim do it. No one really does nefilat apayim the way it was supposed to do. Ashkenazim just switch the mizmor to a different mizmor, but they do the actual falling. We just keep the mizmor but don't fall. Now, what the reason is that no one does it is, again, complicated beyond the scope of this shiur. So that is as far as where to stand, where to sit.
Back to Rosh David, whenever we sing Shachavim, do we bow down?
No, the minhag is not to do that. It is even a question, because the reason for it is anywhere the Chazal did not institute to bow, we don't bow. So now there are a lot of questions. In Alon Shabbat is not one of the places, but still we do kind of like a little bit, right? And why Brich Shemeh, when they bring out the Torah, when we say, Mishtachavim, that's also a place that people do it in the open Sefer Torah. Those all become a question, but the short answer is that the minhag is not to do it, and there's a halachic reason backing that why we don't do it. Okay, so that is that. The third question is, when should a girl or woman not say Hashem's name in Shacharit? When should she say Hashem's name? I think we covered that, right? Yes. Oh, I forgot.
Sorry, just a question back to standing up. For Az Yashir, women should not stand up there?
For Az Yashir, we don't stand up.
Thank you.
So, I think we mentioned when we don't say Hashem's name. Again, there's one in the bracha of Shasani Kirtzono, and then you have it, all the brachot of Baruch Shamar, Yishtabach, and Kriyat Shema. Those are the times that we don't mention Hashem's name. Now, this is my favorite. If a girl pronounces davening with Ashkenazi pronunciation, is she yotze davening? Absolutely not. I'm just joking. Just joking. Yes, you're yotze. B'diavad. And here's a rundown quick through what there is. Why yotze? Because so long as you're understanding what you say, right, and it's considered according to one minhag, at least one legitimate minhag, it's considered the proper pronunciation, then you're yotze. But now it becomes a question of, we have all these differences, and it's not just Sephardi Ashkenazi. I mean, if you get past the Sephardi Ashkenazi stigma and the prejudice that each one has, really it's within the Sfaradim is different. The Teimanim do it one way, the Iraqis do it a different way, the Syrians do it a different way, and some of them, this is actually a real sugya that you could learn within the Rishonim of how the pronunciation of Vav is. And the Shulchan Aruch says if a Shaliach Tzibur does not differentiate between Tet and Taf, Chet and Chaf, Aleph and Ayin, he should not be a Shaliach Tzibur. Now, Ashkenazim don't have any difference between them. Sephardim also in many communities have kind of like lost the differentiations. But there are, if you want to learn them, we certainly had it back in Iran. The more Arab countries, they had it even more because part of the Arabic language, so the Syrians had it more. But again, that has its flaws as well. For instance, in the Syrian community, for them the kamatz sounds more like a patach. So you say, what's the big deal? The big deal is in the pronunciation of actually yud ke vav ke, adnut. Instead of saying nai, you say nai. It sounds like a patach, and that's pronouncing Hashem's name. If you mess up, you're in big trouble. So therefore, that's something to be careful. In the schools, I'm not sure in the Sephardi school here what they do. I did hear that it's veering towards the Syrian pronunciation, which would certainly not be the proper thing to do. In that one element, it should be like a kamatz, a proper kamatz, like but not it's not noi, right? It becomes more Ashkenazi / Hasidish. That becomes also questionable. Now you find a lot of the Ashkenazi gedolim that they actually hired themselves Sephardi Melamdim to teach them because they felt that was the proper Mesorah. The greatest of them perhaps is the Chatam Sofer is Rebbe. Reb Natan Adler. Adler means an eagle in Lashon Ashkenaz, and they used to call him Hanesher Hagadol, the mighty eagle. Reb Natan Adler, the whole Europe, basically relied on his psakim in halacha. He was a legendary figure in Torah. He hired himself a melamed to teach him Sephardi Havara, and ever since then, he did not let anyone be a shaliach tzibur in his bet midrash. Arvit, Shachrit, and Mincha he davened by the Amud, Sephardi Havara. Right, so you find this again. If you're going to mention names, there's a lot of gedolim that did this. For instance, in the more recent history, there's a Rav in Chicago, as known the Ridbaz. Then he went to Eretz Yisrael. They almost shot him, his Baal Batim, in the shul because he stood very strongly against the treif meat that the butchers were. This is early on, the late 1800s, in the United States. And they warned him, said, if you speak up again, I'll kill you. And the guy on Shabbat morning, he wasn't afraid. He stood up to speak, and he actually took a gun and shot at him. He missed, and he ran away for his life, and he went to Eretz Yisrael afterwards, after Shabbat, obviously. But he writes in Tshuvot Ridbaz, in Simar Chav Zayin, the same thing. He says a proper Havara is Havara Sfaradid. And so is in Switzerland, one of the greatest postim of the previous generation, but was Rabbi Chiel Yaakov Weinberg. He wrote the Tshuvot Sridei Esh in Chelek Bet Siman Hey, I think it is. He writes the same thing. Many sources of such. The cutest of all probably is the most interesting of all, I should say, is Reb Henkin. Reb Henkin, Alav Shalom, he was by Rav Moshe Feinstein held of him as the Gadol Ador in America. Rav Yosef Eliyahu Henkin, tremendous person. Not time to explain what a giant of Torah he was. And he writes in Tshuvot Ivra, in his Tshuva Sefer, he writes every cheder, every school should and speaking about Ashkenazi ones, should hire Sephardi Melamdim to teach in Sephardi Havara because of a very simple cheshbon. He brings the Shulchan Aruch, says there are differentiations between tet and taf, chet and chaf, ayin and alef. We, the Ashkenazim, have lost the mesorah on what the difference is. We just say them the same way, sounds the same way. They at least have a mesorah. So forget about looking into the mesorah for now. No mesorah, some mesorah, you should go with some mesorah. At least maybe you're right. By us, he says, we're for sure not right because Chazal tell us that there are differences. We don't have a difference. So something went wrong over here. That's his cheshbon. But on the other hand, I should mention the very big names. We talk about Chazanish, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Rabbi Yashiv, big major poskim. They say no. Ashkenazim should keep their own Havara, Sfarim should keep their own Havara, and each one has their own minhag, and they have what to rely on. They should not change the Havara. So that's just to give you a background of how this sugya looks like in halacha. So if you are pronouncing because you learned in school in a certain way and it's very difficult, and it's a legitimate Havara, legitimate, I mean, not looking into the halacha the way we just did, but there's a whole community that pronounces like that, you certainly have what to rely on, and you're yotze. It's no problem. should a person try to do what the Sephardi should try to do? Of course they should, little by little. You can. It's very difficult to daven b'kavanah when you're paying attention to those things. So you could start with the safs and tafs, and then little by little you can learn that if someone could do that. Kol hakavod. If not, you are yotze. That's certainly true, and obviously for men this would be more relevant because Kriyat Shema for them is for sure a biblical mitzvah, the way we paskin, and you're dealing with biblical things left and right. For women, again, if Tefila is the Oraita according to Rambam, so yes, but Kriyat Shema and many others are not in that level, so obviously that is to be considered as well. Okay, do girls have to say Tachanun and Korbanot daily? No. But again, if you say it, nice. We have answered this before. Does a girl have to make Zman Kriyat Shema? And when is the last time could daven Shacharit? So, again, Kriyat Shema, you don't have to make Zman Kriyat Shema. The only reason that you say Kriyat Shema is to accept all Machut Shamayim. So if you missed it, it's fine. And especially in the summertime when it becomes much earlier and it's hard to make it. So sometimes you miss the Zman Kriyat Shema, that's fine. And the latest time of Tefilat Shacharit for those who daven is going to be the same as men. They should make it on time, and Chatzot is basically the deadline with the Eved. And the last question is the problem for girls to daven Arvit because it was specifically accepted by men, which I guess I jumped the gun by the first question already. The answer is that there's no problem whatsoever. Like the Gemara says in page 21 of Masechet Brachot, Halvai sheitpalel adam kol hayom. Halvai, the person should daven the entire day. I'll end with one thing before we open for questions, if anyone has questions. Zohar Kadosh, the Mishnah brings this, that when a person stands to daven, there's a concept of standing next to the wall, not passing in front of a person that is in the middle of Shemona Esrei, and that applies equally to women as men. It's asur to pass in front of them, even a little bit farther. According to Zohar, as far as eye sees in front of a person that's davening, you cannot pass. And therefore you find many people that stand by the wall and they daven. Zohar Kadosh says this is, you're standing in front of Hashem. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu was Yareh Mahabit. He didn't want to look because there's this concept of tzniut and modesty in front of Hashem. Hashem is in front of me, I close my eyes. Zohar HaKadosh says that's why a person in Shemona Esrei should keep their eyes closed if they know the tefillah by heart, obviously. Otherwise, just in the Siddur, not looking around. So that's the halachic aspect, but it's so beautiful to think. You stand in front of Hashem and you speak to Him. The Pasuk says the massive, enormous size of the universe, that if you zoom out, you see we are a nothing. And yet, the Torah says, Bechol makom asher azkir et shemi, avo elecha uberachticha. Any time that you mention my name, I will personally come to you and give you a blessing, give you a bracha. Imagine an enormous zchut that we have to stand in front of Hashem. We say, Hashem sfatai tiftach ufi agiti yetach. Hashem, please open my mouth. We're scared to even start speaking because we realize the awesomeness of being able to stand in presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When He says, I will come to you and I'll give you a bracha, that's something enormous and amazing to be able to take advantage of. Be'ezrat Hashem, for all of us, as we started in the beginning, is Devarim ha'omdim berumo shel olam. Tefillah is the highest tool that we've got, and Bnei Adam is Azarim bo. Unfortunately, because of the routine and the common daily practice, it becomes dull. It becomes not exciting. But it really should be something that we all take advantage of. B'ezrat Hashem. Thank you for listening. Now, if you have any questions, you can ask.
When Rabbi Yisraeli said that the last time to daven is by chatzot, so hypothetically, if it's 1 minute till chatzot, does that mean you can start Shemona Esrei right then, or you have to?
Halachically speaking, it's a good question, and it's a machloket like everything else. One of my pet peeves is, aside from Hashem's existence, everything else is machloket. But halachically speaking, yes, there is. As long as you start it in time, that is fine.
It has to be a minute before chatzot or on chatzot itself.
Before chatzot. And again, these things we are privileged to have zmanim and times and this, but these are not accurate to that level either because of forget about the halachic times. Even if you get those accurate according to degrees below the horizon and so on and so forth, there are a lot of machlokets how to calculate these things. And then you have Los Angeles, and the time that your watch shows, every few miles really is few minutes off, but the way internationally is accepted, it's by hours, right? So everywhere between this area shows that hour, right? So that is also perhaps off a little bit. So don't wait for the last minute is my advice.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a little bit like Spanish, but let's say you're in the middle of davening and you use the bathroom, and then after you have to say Asher Yatzar. Like, let's say you already said before shop, and you already said Asher Yatzar, and then in the middle of, let's say maybe Zoom out, someone needs to use the bathroom, so you have to say Asher Yatzar after you use the bathroom.
Again, so if you're not saying brachot, so whatever you're saying is optional, basically, right? For men, it would be different because they can't have a hefsek, they can't, pause for not necessary things in between. For women, as long as you finish the pasuk, whatever it is that you're doing, you could say Asher Yatzar not to forget it, and then go on. Does that answer? Yeah.
If a Sephardi girl knows her nusach, is she still yotze if she davens with a different nusach?
That's a good question. The proper thing is to follow your nusach based on the minhagim, because it's usher to change one's minhagim, right? It's a real isur, right? Al titosh torat imecha. But there is a debate whether or not this fully applies to nusach Tefila. So, for instance, a leniency that you find here is a question that was asked to Rabbi Shaul. It's printed in the Pticha of the second volume before the Sefer starts. What should Baal Tshuva do, or people who have, let's say, a person became Baal Tshuva with a Sephardi Rav and learned everything Sephardi, and then he goes to Yeshiva. They tell him, no, you're Ashkenazi. You should go back to your nusach of your father, to the minhagim of your. You have a whole community, right? So he was asked, should this person stay Sephardi, or can he, or should he go back and become an Ashkenazi, and vice versa? You have the reverse as well. And he says very strongly that a person that becomes Baal Tshuva, even though that his parents were not from, but he didn't grow out of the ground, right? He comes from a minhag, and he has to go back to that minhag. But he says the exception that he is willing to give is nusach Tefila. He says nusach Tefila is not as big of a deal in the halachot of minhagim as the rest of minhagei isur. Therefore, if it's very difficult for them to change their nusach from nusach Ashkenaz to Sfar to Ashkenaz, whatever it may be, then they could keep the nusach Tefila that they're used to and daven with that nusach, and that's fine. So the short answer is, yes, they should, but if it's too difficult, they could keep it.
So if a girl in Beisako, for instance, that gets called up to be chazanit, they're allowed to daven for that day, like Ashkenaz.
Oh, that's a different question.
Oh, so that's what I was trying to say.
Okay, that's a different question. The question is, if you go by the... I didn't know they have a minion there like that.
Yeah,
but, wow. So if if you have a person that is serving the tzibur, then they should follow the minhag of that tzibur. Certainly in everything that is being said out loud. And Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva in the second volume of his tshuvot, I think it's in Simar Chav Gimel, that he discusses this, and he says that everything that's out loud, that's a kedusha you say out loud even, he holds that it should be said in the nusach of the tzibur. Harvadia disagrees with that, but again, when it comes to Chazan at least, and you're leading the tefillah, it would be inappropriate to change from the minhag of the tzibur. So therefore, you should have Rav Moshe Feinstein. I was very close with his grandchildren and his great grandchildren, and he said that whenever he went to the Lower East Side, the Sephardi minyan, he would go and get a Sephardi siddur, and he would daven the entire tefillah from a Sephardi siddur, right? a certain humility, and at the same time he held halachically that's the right thing. Again, Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli disagrees with that. He says, no, you go to a Sephardi minyan, you could daven Ashkenazi, you could take your Siddur and daven Ashkenazi, or vice versa. Sephardi goes to Ashkenazi, you could do that. And that seems to be the majority opinion. But at the same time, things that are said out loud, and certainly someone that is leading for the tzibur, that should be sensitive to the minhag of that tzibur that they're in. Again, so that's a good question. I said it's better according to Chacham Obadia. Others disagree with that. Rabbi Zion Abba Shaul, in the second volume of his Tshuvot, I think it's page 71, he says you can. The woman should daven musaf. Obadia says better not because of the cheshbon that we mentioned. So again, if someone's clear minhag has to be to say it, fine. If not, it's better to probably learn and say Tehillim and other things. That would be according to Chacham Obadia. But again, with the exception of Yamim Norayim and Ne'ilah. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Is that last time you want to say Tefila, like at night?
Yeah, after 13 and again, this is according to Chacham Obadia, 13 and a half minutes Shaud Zmaniyot after, that means halachic minutes, which is not necessarily a clock minute. It will depend on the season. In the summer, it's longer than 13 and a half clock minutes, and in winter, it's shorter. So after that, you should not say it. After Shkia, after sunset. There are those who say already after Shkia, you should not say it. But Harvadi is lenient that within the first 13 and a half minutes, halachic minutes, after sunset, you could still say Tachanun. Oh, that's a different story. I thought you were talking about Mincha. You could say that after Chatzot. So again, that changes. You could check it in your Zemanim apps or calendars. What the Chatzot is, again, that's something that you could look up. It depends on the season and the place you are.
And also, my second question is, I just learned that you're supposed to, like, the way we do Shema Esrei is you, like, use your right foot to walk forward, and then whenever you finish, use your left foot, right foot. So what's the direction, like, which direction do you do the bowing first? Is it like the right?
When you
once you finish and you move back, you know how we bow?
Oh, okay, not the stepping back.
Yeah.
That's right and left.
Right and then left?
Yeah. Again, it's a machlokes in the tour whether or not you use your right or Hashem's right. Yeah. So that's so. No, I'm saying, well, when I say right, I'm talking about you, but I'm saying the machlokes starts from there. Well, there is actually two opinions. Yeah.
Sorry, one more question. She brought up bowing. During Shemona Esrei, when we bow, do we bend our knees and then that? Like how? I know there's possibly a difference in opinion as to bending the knees.
Halachically speaking, is not a necessity. The halacha necessitates the shidra, the spine, and the head. But we have called berech lecha tichra, right? Kol koma lefanecha tishtachaveh. So because of that, many people they have the knees as well. But so that's part of it. Part of it, the way it's done. But again, that it's not necessitated by by modim also is like that. There's a way you do it by regular brachot when you say Baruch Atah Hashem. Right? They go again. That by itself is a machloket, but by modim you could just go however it does not have to be in a certain order. But the knees, the minhag is to do it, even though that's not necessarily part of the thing. Yes. Davening means Shemona Esrei?
No. Like, after that,
Yes, again you can, because especially if you're not saying the brachot before and after, so then there's no isur hefsek. So you just finish the pasuk you're in, and he's answered amen. That's fine. And again, even for men, depending on where they are, the amen and brachot is a question. Yes.
But when you said about not saying Shem Malcha, is it only when there's an actual bracha, or in general when there's Shem Malcha? Like in Baruch David, there's also Shem Malcha.
No, it's only by the actual text that's required for bracha. Not in Baruch. That's a good question. Thank you for listening.